Any process needs to allow for communication at all levels, regardless of education or affiliation. I think that having different kinds of meetings would address that, and that was put forward. There's a big education component here, that people who are involved in this process need to have an understanding of the anecdotal nature of some of the information that's being provided. Also, needing the folks that are involved to have an understanding of Aboriginal rights and title and how that works or interacts with PNCIMA and the integrated management process. As far as where this engagement should take place, it was suggested that sub-regions may be a way to go, and one of the considerations that was put forward around developing that would be looking at traditional territories of First Nations. Some very detailed recommendations on how to move forward within sub-regions, get a management team, develop a terms of reference, tech team, stakeholders committee, sectors nominate representatives. They're responsible for reporting back, leave some open seats for community members, have open meetings, have a question and answer period after every meeting. So getting some specific recommendations there. Overarching, the need to involve as many people as need to be there, both people who live on the coast and those who have experience or have lived on the coast, with a recognition that whatever need is put together needs to be effective and not become so unwieldy that it's not able to respond to some of the urgent situations that arise. And also overarching is a need for this to be well funded, both to ensure that the participation can happen in the stakeholder engagement, and also that things are able to be followed through on at all levels. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Caroline.
In terms of a development process for stakeholder engagement, as individuals or representatives of their sectors, here's a very broad representative sample of what people in my group said they needed in order to feel effectively engaged. People noted that it's important to recognize the complexity of this process and its ongoing nature. It was suggested that PNCIMA could be seen as a projet de société, a phrase which perhaps doesn't translate very well into English, but which is meant, I believe, to indicate that it's everyone's responsibility. Our whole society has an interest in it. There was quite a bit of discussion in my group about an important issue, what to call people who can be very broadly defined as those involved in PNCIMA. There's a lot at stake in terms of the choice of the term which will be used, and which will be used so often over the course of time. It needs to be a term that everyone in PNCIMA feels comfortable with. The process needs to be an inclusive one to ensure effective representation and communication of ideas as part of the PNCIMA process, and also back to the various sectors or affiliations that are represented. And culture and religion need to be taken into account. Process and decision making should be transparent, again highlighting the importance of effective communication. It was suggested that PNCIMA should be an interest-based process. And in terms of components and implementation, there will be some overlap with the points on the process for effective engagement, but some of the highlights were how important it is when groups are brought together, whether it's a big group like this one or a smaller group that eventually is put together in the future, for the valuable time together to be used effectively. Meeting locations should take into account geographical diversity. And as I just mentioned, there should be some consideration to diversity in terms of the size of the meetings. Some would be broad in scope and others would be narrower in scope, depending on the topic being discussed or the situation at hand. There should be an ongoing commitment to funding for engagement to ensure that people can attend meetings and represent geographical areas. The process should be solution-based, forward-looking, and there should be lots of communication. Proactive implementation of plans constructive use of emotion to drive the process forward. The implementation of PNCIMA needs to be monitored and evaluated on an ongoing basis. It was brought up as well that legislation should be taken into consideration in terms of its impact on PNCIMA activities, and it should be considered whether PNCIMA should have input into the formulation of legislation where that's required. And timeframes need to be in place to ensure accountability. And those were some of the main themes that my group came up with. Thanks very much.
Great, Caroline. Thanks. Pete.
So my group, it was recognized that what we have here is a golden opportunity to make PNCIMA the way that everyone wants it to be, since the government isn't coming in with a defined process and timeline. And so stakeholders really need to come together to ensure that it is what they want it to be. There was a lot of talk around sort of the scope of the process, and everyone felt there was a real need to be able to really understand it and trust it before really thinking through what involvement was wanted and was needed. There was a lot of talk around, wanting stakeholder engagements at all levels of the process and at all stages, and that stakeholders need to be involved in the implementation and not just the development of the plan. A fair bit of talk around transparency and wanting to ensure that all of the information was available to everyone, and ensuring that all of the stakeholders understand the PNCIMA governance context, and also around how input is being used in the process and how it's influencing outcomes. As well, scale was another sort of big topic, and there's a definite need to recognition that forums need to be happening in smaller localized regions, as well as probably need to partition areas and discussions around issues and regions, and make sure that there's a real balance between what's happening everywhere, so that everything is sort of addressed at a level that's needed. There was a big need to identify existing groups and advisory processes that are out there, and to find ways to be able to work with those existing groups and ensure that they all have the resources and opportunity to be present and influence. And as well as finding the gaps that exist or that are there between the existing groups, and developing ways and processes for those gaps to be filled. And yeah, I mean, there was a definite, money seemed to be a big thing in ensuring that, in order to continue, that resources are available for all the stakeholders to participate in these things. And as well, not just resources, but also there was talk around timing, and a need to recognize that not everyone that needs to be, not all stakeholders are available at sort of the traditional times that a lot of the things are held, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, that a lot of people can't make it in those things. And so there needs to be need to look at ways that the people that aren't able to attend in those times, that they're able to be engaged and involved in the same way as everyone else.